On today's show, we will break down even more signings as free agency is in full swing. We'll also bring in a very special guest. Remember, as always, you can listen to this episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast from. Today, we are live on YouTube, and you're inside the Johnny Dell Football Academy. Hello, once again, Niner Faithful. We are back live on YouTube on the channel that's trying to answer the whys and hows of the game. I am Adam Marino, as always, joined by Mr. Johnny Dell. And today, very special day because today we get to talk to Shifty. What is going on, my man?
I am good. I'm good. Super stoked to be here. Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it and can't wait to get into the discussion. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, a lot going on, even more stories to talk about than when we had all the breaking news just a couple days ago. So let's kind of get into it. Before we do, I want to understand a little bit more about you, Shifty. How did you get started? How did you become so shifty? And kind of explain where we can find you, where your shows are, and different things like that. And then we have like a million questions to get into then.
Cool. So yeah, I'll keep it relatively brief because I know there's like so much to talk about. But yeah, I started my channel about a year and a half ago, about midway through the 2021 season. As you can see, diehard Niner fan, love talking Niner football. I think a lot of my friends and family were just kind of sick of me talking about it all the time. So it's just like, hey, go ahead and how about you make a channel? And I did that. So typically I'll do videos on, breaking news. I'd love to do like draft talk, things like that. But my favorite thing to do typically is when I'm not doing shows with, guys like you who also do a lot of good work. It's I love streaming the games and like live play-by-play reactions. That's where most people have kind of found me. But yeah, Shifty's 49ers talk, if you put it into YouTube, should pop right up. Same for Instagram and Twitter as well.
Awesome. So here's what I want to get into first. I don't know. There's a lot of talk that the Solomon Thomas version for the Raiders is who we picked up. Are you guys on the same page that it's like, what are we doing? Or is it more like, hey, but wait till we get our hands on him, wait till he lines up next to Bosa, wait till he's in our locker room? Is it more that mindset? Is it more, why do we need Solomon Thomas? We already got us. We already went through that.
Well, I'll jump in on that first. So I think the Solomon Thomas comparison comes in just because of draft slot and lack of production. So Solomon Thomas, obviously we know the history, drafted really high, never got the right production out of that. So the question becomes, is this the same sort of situation? And we have to ask, why did we see that with Solomon Thomas? I think some of that is that we definitely reached. We were at a point where people need to remember that where the 49ers team was when we drafted Solomon Thomas, that we were a historically bad run defense. I mean, historically bad. I think we went one game where we didn't give up a 100-yard rusher. I mean, it was bad. It was the worst rushing defense in the league by something like 70 yards a game. It was horrible. All that to say, Solomon Thomas coming out of college was graded as the number one run defender in out of college. Okay. So he was drafted because he was supposed to be the difference maker to shore up against the run first. And then he was like the number 6 pass rusher. And then the thought was that he would be a really good pass rusher. And they ended up bringing him in. And then I think he got miscast. Okay. He was supposed to be that edge guy. I'm totally blanking on his name, from Seattle, who just wreaked havoc on us for years. That he ended up going somewhere else after them. But we were trying to recreate the Seattle defense, and he was going to be that role. And he wasn't physically able to be an edge player. He really should have, from the beginning, should have been a 3 technique, but you had DeForest Buckner, you had Eric Armstead. There was no point in putting Solomon Thomas at a 3 technique. I think they were hoping that he would be the kind of talent that could play anywhere along the line. It didn't work out, okay? Farrell was a guy that, for one reason or another, has just not seemed to become that elite edge player, but I don't see us asking him to be an every down elite edge player. What I do like is that he's got the physical tools to play that Arden Key role, that Charles Omenihu role, that role where we put a hybrid edge guy inside on passing downs and in passing situations, and the matchup problems that that creates, and the things that allows you to do schematically as far as stunts and twists. John, it wasn't Irvin. It was who was playing the Leo position before Irvin. I'm totally blanking on his name. It was early 2010s. I don't know why I'm
Bennett?
blanking. Yes, Bennett. It was Michael Bennett. Okay.
Bennett.
Solomon Thomas, if you look at his physical measurables, was very, very, very similar to Michael Bennett. He was not a Michael Bennett player. And so with Farrell, I think we're not going to be bringing him in to be the Samson Ebicom replacement. Drake Jackson is that person. Okay. You draft, the 49ers always draft a year out, right? They don't draft for that year. They draft a year out. Hafunga was drafted to replace Tart, who was going to be a year out. Womack was drafted to replace a slot, which they thought was going to be filled by Lenore this year, and ended up, things got moved around, and then Jimmy Ward ended up getting the slot. Womack was projected to be, and we'd brought a guy in to play the slot too, remember? And then we ended up cutting him because Womack did so well in training camp preseason. So the 49ers always draft a year out. Banks was brought in a year out for Tomlinson. Drake Jackson was brought out a year out for Samson Ebicom. So when we look at edge, that's been something that's been brought up a lot of, are we going to address this in free agency? I don't think so. I think this is the only edge type player we bring in, because Drake Jackson was brought in to replace Ebicom. And Colton McKivitz was brought in to replace Mike McGlinchey. I think the only way he didn't was if Mike McGlinchey missed his market, and Mike McGlinchey overshot his market a little bit, right? So as far as with Edge, Farrell is not there for that. He's there in that Arden Key Omenihu role where they're a highly athletic guy that hasn't always been a top tier talent. But when you look at the pressure rates that Arden Key and Omenihu had before getting to the 49ers and then after, each one was about a 4% increase. I think Arden Key was like from 8% pressure rate up to 12%, and then Omenihu was like 9% pressure rate up to 13%. And Cleveland Farrell has the highest pressure rate of either of those two guys. So his is like 9.8%, something like that. So you could expect even a higher form of production out of Farrell in that same role than we've even seen from Arden Key and Omenihu. So that's how I view that signing.
Shifty, you on the same page, or are you going the other way?
No, I think I agree with a lot of it. And, Johnny covered a lot of things there. What I would say is that coming at it from like another perspective is that, look, he was drafted to the then Oakland Raiders, I think, now Vegas Raiders. But look, he was the 4th overall pick, a lot of expectations on his shoulders, a lot of weight that it's like really put on him to be the dominant guy, very much similar to, I think, a Solomon Thomas. When you get drafted that high, regardless, you expect him to come in and be a pretty dominant player. Now, I think it's really good for a guy like Farrell, where he can come over to San Francisco. He's not going to be he's not going to be the focal point for any offense. Offenses are going to worry about and game plan for Bosa, now Hargrave, Armstead, all of our talent like in the back half of the defense. So I think he's going to be a rotational guy. I think he's a guy who'll probably end up, hopefully, maybe 5-6 sacks, hopefully makes a couple of big plays. And I think it's going to be, it's funny that Johnny was talking about, we draft a year out. One of the other things that we do a lot, and I think we've done really well, is that we bring in these 1-year guys. We really bump up their value. They go and sign to another team, and we get a 5th round comp pick. And then we can just keep replenishing the roster. So I think Cleveland Farrell is a perfect guy for that, for that role. He's still a young guy, still a lot of potential. And I think he's going to come to a really talented defense. So there's no downside. I think the numbers just came out. It's 1.8 million guaranteed. So price is right. I think it's a great move.
No,
Yeah.
agreed. A couple of announcements as we're in the live chat before I want to get into Isaiah Oliver over Mosley, and they are guys. If you are in the live chat, the way that we can help the algorithm is if you type in hashtag JD, and that grows the channel, which is what we're trying to do. Also, shout out to Wayne Breezy. Always love having him in the chat. Make sure that you are like and subscribing to Shifty's channel, Wayne Breezy's channel. Obviously, we would love for you to subscribe to our channel here as well. But make sure that you're taking care of Niner Nation because we want everyone to grow. It's so much more fun when we're interactive with everyone. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, it helps grow the show when you give us a strong review so that we can get more guests like Shifty. Shifty's not coming onto a show that only has one viewer on it and it's my mom. He's not doing that. But because this channel has grown, he obviously wants to come on, right? That's thanks to you guys. So, again, thank you. I see in the chat all the hashtag JDs. We love it. We're trying to grow this thing, guys, because it's such a blast having everyone here. Shifty, I want to ask you about 3rd and 15 against Emmanuel Mosley in the Super Bowl. And if we would have had this new cat coming in from Atlanta, do you think we give up that long play? And talk to us about what you think about the signing of this new Falcon.
3rd and 15 Super Bowl. I don't know. I feel like I've blocked that out of my memory. I don't
You're
even
like, what?
know
What are you
what you're
talking
really
about?
talking about. Uh,
Oh, I remember.
I don't know. I mean, I think it was just one of those unfortunate plays that, it, God, yeah, I haven't thought about that play in a while. So thank you for bringing that up. Uh, but I don't know. I mean, I really do like I think it's a really another really solid signing, kind of talking about Isaiah Oliver. Not one that I was actually necessarily expecting. I kind of had a feeling that we would maybe address like the nickel spot because with Womack we do draft typically a year out, but I think it's good to have like a veteran guy who's kind of been there. The guy I was looking at a little bit more was maybe like a Bryce Callahan who's played that role a lot, been around the league a lot, and would come at a reasonable price too. But coming back to Oliver, he's one of those guys where I remember him in the draft because it was 2018, and he has that typical and prototypical size that we like to get in those like cornerbacks. Came out of Colorado, second round pick. I think just I remember looking at him leading up to the draft, and then he hasn't really, not to say he's done nothing, but he hasn't really exploded onto the scene in Atlanta like I thought he might. Um, but overall, I think it's a really solid signing, and I was actually pleasantly surprised looking at like a lot of like the numbers behind it, how well he's done in terms of coverage. We saw last year he picked off Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't know whether to credit Isaiah Oliver or just say, Jimmy, what the hell throw is that? I mean, it was around halftime, so I think he just said, screw it. But I was really pleasantly surprised by his performance last year. And again, he's coming to a defense that's really, really good. So he's going to have talent around him to help him out. I'm excited to see how it goes. I think we all know that it's going to be Mooney Ward and Lenore on the outside, and then it's going to be guys like Oliver and then Womack on the inside. So really excited to see what he does. Again, I like these guys because they're still like relatively young, and it really feeds into the fact that I think there's still like some untapped potential there, and I think that we have a really good staff here in San Francisco. Love the Steve Wilkes hiring, and so I think we'll get the most out of these guys. But I like the signing overall.
Yeah, I want to ask Johnny now. A couple of things that you touched on that I want to get on with Johnny is you said who would be on the outside, on the inside. There's talk about there could be Lenore would move to Nickelback if he can beat him out. So Johnny, what are the odds that you see that happening? Because, and here's the reason that I want to ask and get into again on this channel, we really love to get into the whys and the hows of the game. And so the way that I'm doing that with Johnny is I want to ask you about Wilkes and that he is more of a zone coverage guy and Mosley wasn't great in zone coverage. And do you think that Wilkes had a strong say in what happened here when both guys are coming off an ACL? So it's like, okay, one or the other. So, and then is that a factor in bringing him in? And does that give him an a decent chance in beating out to start on the outside?
Well, so first I'll address the will Lenore move to the slot? I hope not. I want where he's been in his career. I hope that we leave him at one spot and let him grow. I don't like this moving guys around in their first few years, trying to learn how to play slot, learn how to play outside. The vision is different. The technique is a little bit different. What you're asked to do is a little bit different. Let them sit at one spot and grow and be really, really good at what you're asking them to do. Don't move them around. Let them master one spot and then move on. We kind of saw a little bit of that with Tarvarius Moore, that we tried to start him out at corner and then moved him to safety and never really has materialized. We know that Jimmy Ward was moved around so much in the early part of his career. He was slot, and then he was safety, and then he was corner, and then he was back to safety. And I think Jimmy Ward alluded to some of that when at the end of this last season, when he was asked about Lenore, and he said, when you let a guy just sit in one spot, he doesn't have a chance but to get better. I think some of that may have been some shade towards what was done to him early in his career and how that slowed his progress along with the injuries. So I want to see Lenore be outside. And I do apologize if I have to mute every once in a while and cough. I'm in Alabama and the pollen is insane here. Okay. My sinuses are going crazy. I'm coughing, everything.
As
I have a cough
you
button, so
right there, yeah.
I'm using that. Yeah. Like I have a black truck and it is yellow right now. I'm not even joking. Like I washed it last week too. Like it is literally yellow. It's different here. So it's a little bit different. But anyways, getting back to that. So I want to see Lenore start on the outside. With Oliver, I see this as a depth signing. I'm not sure that he's really being brought in to be a starter. Now, what I do find interesting, and talking about a little bit the difference from Wilkes and Ryan. So D'Amico Ryans ran zone more than any other defensive coordinator in the league last year. So D'Amico Ryans ran zone. We were running zone something like 70+% of the time, if I remember right. Large volume of zone. Now, with that, a lot of times in zone, or when we would blitz, behind that, we would play a zone with what's called man match principles. So you're in a zone, but you're playing kind of a man matching rules within that. So it's a hybrid of zone man. So you have to have guys that can play zone, but play man really well, because really after 2 seconds, it's man. And so what is interesting about Wilkes is that Wilkes, from the film I watched, it wasn't this drastic shift from zone to man, but Wilkes played more man than D'Amico Ryans did. And that was something that under Ryans, I think one reason we didn't play man as much was we were just not a great man coverage team. So so I think overall, the team is looking to get a little bit better at that, because I expect Wilkes to play that a little bit more. And if there was a difference between Mosley and Oliver to me, is that Oliver would be a slightly better man player. Mosley is a slightly better zone player. Now he has what you like from a corner, especially in a 3-deep system, which Wilkes did play a little bit more 3-deep than what we ran, which you like size, you like length. Length is really big on those outside guys. I think Oliver is just that depth signing, and a guy that you're bringing in. What is the progress with Ambry Thomas? Are they bringing him in to push Ambry as the number 3 guy, the number 4 guy on the end? Because we saw near the end of last year that Ambry, even though he had been playing in the playoffs last year, the year before, when we needed somebody to come in on the outside, like if Ward had dropped out, that was Womack. So something there is going on with Ambry Thomas, and I think this signing speaks a little bit to that and what's going on there, because I really see him more as that number 3 reserve corner on the outside.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see in that defensive back room what shakes out. I want to ask Shifty, as we get into Fred Warner, Mooney Ward, and Jake Brendel, I want to discuss. But Shifty, before that, I want to ask you, do you have someone? First, we'll go unrealistic and realistic on your wish list. as we are in the thick of things for the free agency, is there someone on your radar that you're like, you know what, this guy could make sense? And then go ahead and give us a guy that you know we aren't getting, but it's just fun to fantasize. It's March, bro. Like, let's have some fun. Like, there's no real football. So, what do you got?
Um, a couple of guys have really come to mind. Now, in terms of like wish list, crazy, don't think it's going to happen. When I heard that Darius Slay was maybe going to get released, I was like, is he maybe the best fit? I'm not sure, but just
Yeah.
terms of talent, I was like, holy moly. I think another guy that I was really intrigued by, and I would be intrigued by, would be Floyd. Getting released from the Rams. He's definitely more accustomed to rushing from that like 2 point stance, but I just look at him. I think compared to a guy who I hear a lot of on like Twitter and stuff, a lot of people are like Yannick Ngakwe. And while I think Ngakwe is a solid player and consistent production wise, I think things like his run defense isn't very good, and that's going to play a huge role in getting time with the defense. Whereas Leonard Floyd, I think, is a little bit better in that aspect. Plus, Floyd kind of meets a lot of the criteria that I think the Niners typically look for with regards to he's productive and he stays healthy. So, and he's 31, so I don't think he'd be breaking the bank. Um, I don't know. I mean, yeah, Darius Slay would have been like my crazy out there signing if we could have made that happen just from a talent perspective. But yeah, wish list. I think that Leonard Floyd is someone who I'm looking at, and then I do think that like finding a second tight end who can be effective. So to me, a guy like Austin Hooper makes a lot of sense. That's someone that I'd have my eye on. But I don't think at this point. I mean, I wasn't even sure if we were going to make a splash signing. So the fact that we went out and got a Javon Hargrave, who I think is going to be just an absolute game changer for this defense. I mean, to get another big time signing would almost feel like asking too much. And I don't think it's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if we do maybe add an Austin Hooper. Maybe we hopefully sign a kicker. I don't know if that's gold or not. And then we have a lot of draft picks. So, and another thing too is that I think that to round out the roster, I wouldn't be surprised if after the draft, if we make a couple of like kind of, just depth signings, depending on how things shake out at like the edge position. Like I could see Jordan Willis coming back on a 1 year deal, Kerry Hyder maybe as well, just for depth and guys who are familiar with what we do here. But yeah,
So
So
let's get
I'll
into more. Oh,
can
sorry,
I
Johnny. Go ahead.
yeah, I'll just jump in there. I love the idea of bringing back Jordan Willis. He's a guy
Yeah.
that, especially down the stretch last year, I really fell in love with. High effort, played really well in the system, and if you're looking for a guy, that can spell and be in there, there was a lot of production for value with that, and so I love the idea of bringing back a Jordan Willis. And I think at this stage, I know we all went crazy when Darius Slay came out, and I was looking at it of like, okay, some people asked me on Twitter and they were a little irritated because I said I'm not sold. I would bring in Darius Slay, not saying that Darius Slay isn't great. It's just value above replacement. How much value are you getting over Diamador Lenore with Darius Slay? Then if you were to put those resources into something like right tackle, something like wide receiver number 3, tight end number 2, something that we may maybe use a lot more. Kicker, kicker is one of those things that people always forget about investing in until you really wish you had invested in it. Just ask the Cowboys how that went last year. So I mean, if it was down to bring back Darius Slay or bring back Robbie Gould, I'm bringing back Robbie Gould. I know that that's not the sexy thing to say at all. Like that is the most boring off-season take ever. But I'm gonna take Robbie Gould because the last thing you want is to be in a one-score game and be trotting out Brett Maher. Just saying.
Hey, I live in Colts country, and everyone is excited about them signing Matt Gay. Like they are like, "Hey, we have a guy that is top 5 in the league, and we can count on." And I mean, they're excited, and so
That
like
sounds
I
like a
get it.
very Colts thing to be excited about.
Well, that touche. Why I have never followed the Colts, even though I live an hour and a half from the stadium. I just would not. But yeah, so about free agency and I should say the draft. Shifty, you mentioned the draft. Is there have you kept up with anyone in college that you kind of have your eye on? You know, Johnny talks a lot about guys from he went to the Senior Bowl with, again, shout out to Wayne Breezy. They went and saw some players. Do you watch a lot of college football? Is there guys that you're like, "Oh my gosh, based on what we do, this guy would be great for that?"
During the season, I typically don't watch a ton of college football just because I mean my emphasis is typically on the NFL. And then usually with how my work schedule would typically be, I can normally either get Saturday or Sunday. So for me, it's always I choose Sunday. Um, but once the season's over, that's when I kind of ramp up and gear into really, and there'll be guys throughout the year that you'll hear about. In terms of like players who I think the 49ers could target, I think to me, look, the Niners have, I think it's 11 draft picks this year. I think that I wouldn't be shocked to see us move up in the draft at a number of places. If we draft 11 guys, I mean, a bunch of them are going to end up either on the practice squad or on other teams. So it might be a case of like, you always got to go for some form of quantity with the draft because as sure as you can be on some guy, you just never know. But I think it'll be a little bit geared more towards quality here. So I'd like to see us move up in the third round to maybe secure some talent there. Whether it's maybe we try and get like a tight end number 2, so that could be. I mean, we could go back to Iowa for a tight end, Sam Laporta. He's like a really solid option there. Maybe Tucker Kraft as well, really athletic kind of guy. So I like the idea of getting Kittle some help, and where maybe you can just allow Kittle, maybe just he doesn't have to play as many snaps. Of course, you want to have Kittle out there typically as much as possible. So maybe you can free him up to kind of do more Kittle things like get the ball in space and just break tackles and go crazy. But I do think that's something that Shanahan has probably wanted to do quite a bit. One of the among others from the 2020 season, that season was a disaster for injuries, but one of the things that was like really intriguing that would have been to see back then was we had Jordan Reed and George Kittle on the roster. So I was really excited to see how that would have worked out. But then I think Kittle was hurt, Reed was healthy, and then it flipped. So
Definitely
but I
flipped.
think a
Yep.
tight end number 2, I like a Laporta. There's plenty of great options later in the draft too, so we don't have to move up, which is awesome. It's a deep class. I think that finding a successor to a Tashawn Gibson, there's a number of guys in the draft as well. Maybe we can move up for. I know a guy that a lot of people talk about that I like too is Sidney Brown from Illinois. That could be an option as well. I like him a lot, and there's a lot of good talent here, and I think the Niners, we strike gold when it comes to the middle round. So I'm super stoked that as of now, at least 3 picks in the third round, 3 picks in the fifth round, 3 picks in the seventh round. So I think maybe even 4. But overall, yeah, I think there's a lot of guys out there. I could kind of rattle on a whole bunch of names, but then I'll be taking up a whole bunch of time. But if I had to say, my wish list would be maybe to move up in the third round. If we take 2 guys in the third round, I think we go maybe Sam Laporta, Sidney Brown, another guy, of course. Right tackle's a bit of a question mark. Like Blake Freeland, BYU. He's a pretty solid guy, pretty athletic. He's played, I think, predominantly at left tackle, so it might be a little bit of an adjustment, but I still think he has the capabilities of coming in and battling at least with Colton McKivitz in the offseason. So those are the 3. I think safety, tight end, and right tackle. And then you got to get some depth at edge too.
I love that you said Sidney Brown. As Adam knows, I've been pounding the
Yes.
table for Sidney Brown since the Senior Bowl. I did not know much about the kid until I went to the Senior Bowl, and I was blown away. He was the first player I noticed there that really stood out to me. It was early on one-on-ones. He was covering tight ends and receivers as well as anybody in one-on-one man coverage drills, as well as any defensive back that was there at the Senior Bowl. And just throughout the week, really impressed with Sidney Brown. He made me go home. When somebody makes me go home and start looking at their tape or at all the footage I can find him, I don't have his college all 22. I wish I did. If you're in the chat and you have access to college all 22, Send me a DM, slide into my DMs and hook me up. But yeah, I love Sidney Brown, and I love the idea of him being that successor to Tayshaun Gibson. Like we said early in the show, that the 49ers like to draft a year out. They like to redshirt guys. So that would be a perfect example. Hufanga would be a perfect example of that, right? And the guy who Sidney Brown reminds me of is Hufanga. The way he moves, his size, his measurables, a lot of things about Sidney Brown remind you of Hufanga. And so being able to let him sit just like Hufanga did, or come in and be that situational 3 safety personnel package, I absolutely love. Now, Shifty, I want to ask you something. I want to get into something that I right before I got on the show, I just replied again. But I've been in a little bit of back and forth with Javi on Twitter about the idea. He's worried that the 49ers are kicking too much cap down the road. Okay, that we're doing all these restructures to sign guys now and kicking a lot of space, and what's really turns out to be prorated bonus down the road, that's going to create the same problem that the Saints have been in. The Saints have had to gut their roster over the last 2 years just to try and become cap compliant, and worried that we're doing the same thing. How do you feel about that? Do you think we're going down the same road as the Rams, who are now obviously have had their whole organization burned down after their Super Bowl, or the Saints, who are chasing one last ring with Breeze? Are we going down that same road?
I don't necessarily think so. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one of the first things is that you can't really overstate how much like COVID had an impact on like revenue and things like that. People weren't able to go to games. So when you think long term, like the salary cap's going to go up and up and up. The other issue too is that where I don't think it's actually going to come against us is, I mean, as of right now, look, we know that Brock Purdy played well when he came in. Trey Lance, it's still a big question mark, although I have a lot of faith in him. But we don't have a quarterback penciled in to be paying like 40, $50 million. So if a guy like Lance or Purdy steps up and they really become that franchise guy, then, well, number one, it's a great thing because we have a franchise quarterback, and that's really going to help us out. But number two, we're not really there yet. Now, to me, I think there's also there's a reason why a guy like Parag Maratha is like widely seen as like a magician with a lot of these kind of things. There's only so much you can work around, but I think he's done a fantastic job since he's been here. And the biggest thing too is that where the 49ers have had just so much success is being able to draft in those middle to late rounds where you get like really quality players for like 2 or 3 years on a cheaper deal. And then when you you have to extend them, or maybe they get traded away or what have you. But I think the Niners do a really good job of working within like being cap, like with being cap compliant. And so I don't think that the mindset of the 49ers is to be, look, we're going to go in for 1 year, maybe 2 years, and that's it. And hopefully it all works out. I think that this organization, I think that John Lynch, Kyle Shannon, these guys, they think long term. So I don't ever think you'll see the Niners just push all their chips in, and be like, we're going in this year and that's it. And I don't think that's necessarily the right move. Like you asked the Saints in recent years, clearly didn't work out for them at all. So I think that the Niners are in good shape. I think that they're building the team the right way. And if we just continue to even have like moderate success in the middle rounds, then I think we should be totally fine. So, but I think just having that mindset of drafting a year ahead and just already having the replacements in place is going to go a long way to making sure that we don't get into that just cap hell. And yeah, so I think I think the Niners should be in good shape. And something that I wouldn't be surprised to see the Niners kind of do a lot is, and we've done it a bit, is signing just quality guys to maybe 1 year deals, or de facto 1 year deals. So it's not like 3 years down the road, oh, we have this maybe mediocre guy, but we gave him crazy money. I think they've learned a lot from like, and they're learning as they go too. I mean, now they're in their 6th year, but John Lynch was kind of new to this game. It was his first time being a GM. So I think they've learned from mistakes like what happened with like D Ford. Like you've noticed, I think in recent years, any big time signing that we make, it's a guy who's proven track record. He's healthy. Like Mooney Ward has been proven to be healthy. Ebukam, it wasn't like a crazy big signing, but he was a guy who played every single game. Then you look at Hargrave, so you know you're going to get production. But I don't think that we'll be in any crazy bad cap situation. And so I do think it's a bright future here.
Yeah, and I think when you look at teams like the Rams and the Saints, the circumstances of how they got there was very different than what we are going through. I mean, the Rams were not only giving out the huge contracts, they were sending away first round picks to get those guys who then they were turning around and giving big contracts to you. You can't do both. You can't both trade away a lot of first round picks and give out big contracts and be sustainable, because you have to be able to have homegrown talent. And really that's what I was getting into the back and forth with Javi over, is it really doesn't matter as far as free agent spending as long as you are getting homegrown talent. If you can't have homegrown talent, it won't matter how much you want to spend in free agency. That is not a sustainable model. If you trade away all your draft picks to get guaranteed talent, it still won't matter because your window will be short because you can't have homegrown talent. The Rams last year watched 8 starters walk out the door and they didn't have the players to come in and replace them. The Saints was a situation where they hit a perfect storm against COVID. Is that Drew Brees was coming into the last years of his playing, and they wanted to give him a last 1 year run, but Brees also wanted to get paid. You can't do both necessarily, especially when it was 2020 and they hit the cap wall, because in 2020, what they ended up doing was they gave Drew Brees $50 million for that 1 year. They gave him a $25 million base salary and then a $25 million bonus. And they ended up having to spread that out over multiple seasons. And then you had COVID hit and the cap ended up being about $32 million less than what was projected. That is what really screwed over the Saints. And then to try and get cap compliant the next season and field a roster, they couldn't just dump cap space because of the amount of dead money that was going to be owed guys. They had to sit there and restructure and boot and kick more cap down the road to even field the team. And then they had to turn around and do it again. And then now, I mean, it was 2020 or 2021 or 22. They had $57 million in dead cap space from everything that they had to do to cut guys just to get under the cap during that, because of what they did in 2020. I mean, they are still feeling the residuals of this, of dead cap and everything from all these things that are going on. So the circumstances of what we're doing is not the same. Somebody's saying, well, it was because they had to pay their whole draft class. No, it wasn't because they had to pay their whole draft class. It's because they didn't have a draft class to replace that one. They could have not extended a couple guys out of their really good draft classes from 2016, 2017, but they didn't have a stock covered in 2018, 19, 20. The deal is, if you're going to be sustainable, you have to be able to be willing to let a guy like Mike McGlinchey walk out the door. You have to have something behind him. You have to be able to let a Samson Ebukam walk out the door. You have to be able to let a Charles Omenihu walk out the door. You have to have something behind them to restock the cupboard, to let a Jimmy Ward walk out the door. The 49ers have been very good at stocking the cupboard through the draft for that. I mean, you look at the amount of players we have that were drafted that were starting last year. If you look at the week 1 roster, or that we're looking at, if you consider linebacker number 3 and slot, like both a starting position, or fullback and slot receiver, like a starting position, I think you can make an argument that there's really, in today's NFL, more like 24 starting spots. When you look at those kind of swing spots, the 49ers had 17 of those 24 guys were drafted. So they have really filled out the roster with guys that they have grown and drafted and brought onto the team. So that is a sustainable model. You have like Deommodore Lenoir is a 5th round pick. Okay. He's starting. He's a starter on this team. You have Aaron Banks, who was a draft pick. You have Burford, who was a draft pick. He was a 5th round guy, another late round pick. Like, he wasn't a high pick, but you're getting these guys you're getting good production from that you have drafted, and you draft well. George Kittle was a 5th round pick. Fred Warner was a 3rd round pick. I mean, you get guys that you draft and aren't in that 1st, 2nd round, because we've been hitting in the later rounds. We have had the luxury to miss on a Solomon Thomas, to so far it looks like miss on a Kinlaw. Um, and we're doing okay. And Lance hasn't worked out yet, but like you said, I believe in him. And you have a quarterbacks on a rookie contract, whether it's Lance or Purdy, either one's on a rookie contract. And really, how these rookie quarterback contracts get structured, you're really probably not looking until for the big cap hit. Like if it's Brock Purdy, that's not going to be till 2027 is when you're really going to see the big cap hit start. If you're looking at Brock Purdy, if you're looking at Trey Lance, it's going to be about the same. Because he's got the 5th-year option as that. You can then structure those to kick some cap down the road, so it's not 2026 or 2027, and you're going to see a huge bump in the cap next year. I mean, huge. We're still facing about $30 million in COVID year losses that have been tacked onto this season. So you're going to see the cap go up north of 250 million and then the rise, okay, for the growth in TV contracts. I think next season you could see a 260 plus $1 million cap. I mean, really. I think 250 is going to be the floor next year. And I would be shocked if it wasn't higher. So I'm not worried at all about where the 49ers are cap wise. Because again, they've shown the proven track record of homegrown guys. What really set the 49ers back during the Harbaugh era was the 2012 draft class. If you look at what really went wrong and where we started to really bump up against the cap was that 2012 draft class. If you go and look through those names, it's like a big hot flaming pile of garbage. Trent Baalke's draft class in 2012 was horrible. It was all sorts of guys that we thought were going to work out really well, and none of them did. So just remember our number 1 pick that year was AJ Jenkins.
Oh, it's hard to
Remember
even
that's he was one of the headliners of that draft class. Okay, so just remember that. That's what killed a lot of that team's sustainability, and plus, I mean, all the things going on behind the scenes. But you haven't had that kind of a draft class from the 49ers yet. They have been able to pluck starters out of every single draft they've had, and as long as they continue to do that, that is a sustainable model.
Yeah, for sure. You talked about even a little bit ago, like restructuring and guys doing that, and definitely a feel good story when you see that Mooney Ward and Fred Warner have restructured their deals because they obviously love being on this team. They believe that, hey, we have something here, and hey, if I get a little bit less so that we can bring in this big monster from Philly, or we can re-sign, this guy or do that, hey, I'm for it because I'm fully vested in this team. And so you love to see that, as well as Jake Brendel got a 4-year deal with 8 million guaranteed. So happy for him. Shifty, what do you think of Jake Brendel?
I really like the move. I think the money was actually pretty reasonable on a couple of like different cap sites, like Over the Cap and Spot Track. They had they had like projections or valuations for some of these players, and Jake Brendel, the contract he signed, came in way below that. So that's definitely good. But for me, and I haven't like done the research with regards to if it's actually true, but something that I would imagine is huge when it comes to the offensive line is just having consistency and continuity and chemistry. So I think back to the start of last year, our entire interior offensive line essentially hadn't even played a regular season game. Aaron Banks played maybe a handful of snaps his rookie year. Burford was a rookie, and Brendel, who's been around the league for a little while, never really played regular season football. And they were all starters week 1. You put them 20 games later, including 3 playoff games, and I think you should see a huge improvement, even just starting next year. But just having that chemistry of being able to identify maybe exotic blitzes, things of that nature, but just kind of knowing I kind of know what the guy beside me is going to do in certain situations really allows the offensive line to perform better. So I think we're going to see, I liked the Brendel signing look. I don't think he's a Pro Bowl caliber guy. I'm not saying he's a top 3 or 5 center in the league necessarily, but I think he's a good fit for what we do here. I think he's coming in at a very reasonable price, all things considered, and he's very familiar with what we do here and the players. So I think it's a really solid signing. And if we hadn't made the Brendel signing and he came in, I think his average annual salary was like lower than Garrett Bradbury, Bradley Bozeman, Ethan Posick, I think, who all got signed this offseason. And I think we got a good deal. And then we have guys waiting in the wings. Someone who I'm a fan of, maybe give him another year would be a guy like Jason Poe. Really like the fit for what he does in the 49ers. I think he was like the practice squad player of the year, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. But I think there's we have guys, Nick Zakel, as well, waiting in the wings. So, I like the move. I know some people for sure thought we could do a lot better. Maybe they thought we should have gone the draft route. And I understand that. But to me, looking at Shanahan, if you look back to 2017, his first year here, I think maybe his first signing, or one of them, was Weston Richburg, to get a veteran guy who can be that leader at center, make the play calls, help out the quarterback. And then Weston Richburg, of course, unfortunately, injuries ended his career early. But then one of the first moves he made, Alex Mack, of course, a guy who's been there, done that. And I think we were just really relying. I think Jake Brendel, again, I think he was pretty solid last year. Not perfect. I think early on there was definitely some struggles. But as the season went on, I don't remember there being too many times where I was like, oh, Brendel totally screwed up there. So I like it. Good money, good value. He knows it. He knows the team. So I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, I think you made a lot of good points. So, you know, and just because we re-signed Jake Brendel doesn't mean that the team is necessarily now shutting the door on upgrading at the center position. I remember it was after the 2017 season, Daniel Kilgore was the center, and they signed him to an extension that offseason. I remember Daniel Kilgore talking about it, that he was in the middle of a workout and he did like a DocuSign on his phone with his contract extension for the 49ers. That it wasn't like this big ceremony where they're going to take pictures of him signing. It wasn't a big contract, but then they still went out and signed Weston Richburg when he was available. So it doesn't preclude the 49ers from still looking at upgrading the center position, but it guarantees you a floor, right, of performance at the center position. And Jake Brendel was a guy early on in the season I was pretty rough on. I remember I did a video showing how the 49ers were like just a couple of Jake Brendel blocks away from having huge gains in the run game. But as the season progressed, what I did like about Jake Brendel is that he got better as the season went along. And by the end of the season, we were seeing some of those explosive runs that we weren't seeing before. And a lot of it was Jake Brendel. And so, I love it of just like, hey, you've continued to improve, you fit in the system, and we start to get the kind of production that we expect from that position. We will reward you with an extension, and not just a 1-year extension. We're going to give you a 4-year extension. So I love it. I think it's a great value signing. But it still allows them to maybe go after that position in the draft, or go after a versatile lineman in the draft. I think it leads a lot of good things. Going back to that 2012 draft class, just because I love messing with the chat, I want to read off what the 2012 draft class is, and let's take a stroll down memory lane. How do you guys feel about that?
Oh, God.
Let's do it.
Okay, round 1, AJ Jenkins. I know I swore in the chat again. Round 2, LaMichael James. Round 4, Joe Looney. Round 5, Darius Fleming. Round 6, Trent Robinson. Round 6, Jason Slowey. If there ever was an accurate name. Then round 7 was Cam Johnson. That was your 2012 49ers draft class.
I remember LaMichael James out of Oregon, like being excited, like, hey, this guy can be a scat back, like, whatever, because Darren Sproles, if you remember, had like really taken off and like become like the guy that people look to. And then we get our version of a Darren Sproles is what the thought was, right? And just it was more like LaMichael Lames. It was bad, all bad news.
I will say that one thing with LaMichael James is that I feel like he had a his rookie year, I don't think was a total disaster. I remember him scoring a touchdown in like the NFC Championship game against
It
the
was
Falcons.
against the Falcons, yeah, on the read
Yeah, and
option with Kaepernick, yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking, okay, this could be, moving forward. I mean, we had Gore, so of course Gore was going to get the majority of the carries, but I thought LaMichael James looked pretty solid. And then I remember from him too was I remember a lot of him kind of like whining and complaining on Twitter about not getting playing time, and then all of a sudden we just never heard from him again.
Well, and the biggest thing with Michael James was that it was a 2nd-round pick. He was drafted almost in the same spot as Deebo Samuel. So,
you live and learn.
Right. So, and when we talk about free agency and sustainability as a team, you can't have a draft class like that. You have like that. That is what sets teams back for a year or two. When you get a draft class where you have no homegrown, every down starting talent, like, I mean that
But not
that was
even like
fun.
starting talent, but just like you got nothing out of that class.
I mean,
Essentially, I
yeah,
think
right.
Looney
Like,
was like a backup guy, depth guy for a little while, but after that, it was
I mean,
just
you're talking about not one NFL starter on there. You're talking about mostly a group of people who never even were true backup quality players. Like, I mean, LaMichael James was out of the NFL by what, year 4, year 5? Like, he couldn't stick around anywhere. None of those guys were worth keeping. AJ Jenkins, obviously he's now a 49ers swear word. It's on the realm of like a Mike Rumph, or
Oh,
Kentwan Balmer,
I was gonna say Kedward Balmer.
which was another bulky era pick. Okay.
God, dude.
Yeah.
I still
Like,
like Jim Drunkenmiller.
oh,
Yeah.
just for the name,
Right. I
and
know.
because Shifty is in Ireland. For those who don't know, he is in Ireland. He was joining us from across the pond. That sounds like somebody who just moved to Ireland. It just really does. I mean, and right before St. Patrick's Day,
Right?
right? So,
Exactly. Had to have
He'd
Shifty
fit in
on,
like a
and
glove.
and fitting in like a glove is you guys in the chat. And again, we want to explain the value that you guys provide and why we want more of it. So remember, if you have not typed in hashtag JD to blow up the chat, to blow up the algorithm, we want to share this with as many people as we can. Again, thank you to Shifty. Shifty, please give us the deets on where to find you. Go through your socials and everything so that we can like and subscribe to all that. Go ahead, man.
Awesome. And yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on. Also, very nice segue to Adam about shouting out the audience. I'm super impressed by that. But I want to say, yeah, so Shifty's 49ers talk on YouTube. Yeah, I've been doing videos kind of like my reactions to the different signings. I did a number of videos kind of leading up to free agency who I thought we could look at. I've also been putting out like a number of like mock drafts, doing mock drafts on the channel, kind of like speaking as I go for each pick. I will ideally be doing a live stream for the draft. I'm debating on it. Probably day 2 and day 3. I don't think day 1. And then, yeah, just check me out though. I do a bunch of videos. I do a bunch of live streams. The games are definitely the most fun thing that people kind of know me for. On Twitter, I've been a lot more active lately. So Shifty's 49ers talk on Twitter. Same thing on Instagram. And yeah, to really appreciate any follows, subscriptions, all that good stuff. It really helps out. And I hope you guys do check it out and enjoy the content. If you do, then feel free to drop a comment. I'm always ready to respond.
For sure. And yeah, we really appreciate you being on the show. I definitely feel like we will have you on again soon because it's just been fun talking to you and getting some more knowledge out there. And again, you're just part of the collective, like the chat. Like we're all Niner fans, guys, and we just love being able to be around each other. And it's almost like, yeah, man, it's almost like we're all hanging out in the same room and it's like cracking jokes and just talking about Jim Drunkenmiller and talking about other cuss words. Like, it's all and the exciting things that we have coming down the pike, right? So again, thank you everyone. Please like and share. Shout out to Wayne Breeze again, who said what's up earlier. And
One
again,
sec.
thanks to
I
Shifty,
think I
man.
just heard Jim Drunkenmiller outside. What the hell?
Oh man, you were
He's
drinking a
drunk here in
beer.
Ireland. What the hell?
Give us a
I'm just
pitch on that beer. What were you drinking, man?
It was a Pilsner. So whenever I finish a can, I always kind of just crumple it up. But it's a Pilsner from Germany. I'm a big Pilsner
Okay,
kind of guy. I can drink things like IPAs and whatnot, but I feel like after one or two, I just get really full. But
sure.
so I'm a Pilsner guy. And yeah, it was a good one. So I wonder And it's a good thing that you mentioned that. So I'm in Ireland. So right now, local time here, it's almost 6 p.m. So if some of you were like watching me and have like a beer, it's not like, 11 a.m. on a Thursday and I'm getting drunk or anything like that. It's
It's
like,
5 o'clock
it's,
somewhere, man. It's
yeah,
5 o'clock somewhere.
exactly.
Yeah, always, always. So
But
again,
yeah, again, I just want to say a huge thank you so much, guys, for having me on, and a lot of fun. And I would definitely be down to do it anytime in the future. I'd love it.
Hey, I'm going to
awesome.
jump in here and give a big shout out to my wife. She is in the chat. That is my beautiful wife there, if you don't know.
Hey, Don.
And so you see her. Yes, I'm a very blessed man. So always giving a big shout out to the wifey who supports all of our endeavors on this. Thank you, honey. Love you.
Yes. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the chat. Thank you for joining us. Take care of each other, and as always, go Niners.